welcome to the Performing Arts series, brought to you by the Kennedy Centre and Prince William Network. My name is Fiona Lindsay and I work for a theatre company in Great Britain called the Royal Shakespeare Company. But this week we're over here in the States playing at the Kennedy Centre, showing a production by William Shakespeare of As You Like It. I'm your moderator for today's programme, but I'm not here alone. I'm joined by my colleagues from the Royal Shakespeare Company and I'm going to invite them now to introduce themselves to you.
Hello, I'm Tom Daley. I'm from Derbyshire in England, and I'm the Assistant Director on As You Like It.
Hi there, I'm Branwell Donaghey. I'm from Derry in Northern Ireland. I play the First Lord in As You Like It, and I understudy Charles, Amiens and Jakes du Bois.
Hi there, I'm Naomi Frederick. I'm from London, England, and I play Celia in the play.
Hello, I'm Edmund Moriarty, and I play Jakes du Bois, and I understudy Orlando, and I'm also from London, England.
Okay, I don't know if any of you know this, but the Royal Shakespeare Company is possibly the largest theatre company in the world. And we specialise, as you might imagine, in doing plays written by William Shakespeare, but we also do new plays. But no matter what play we do, it's really important that we breathe life into a story, that we take that story and try and make it fresh and new and exciting. And in order to do that, as you probably know again, we go through a process of rehearsal. And in rehearsal, there are certain things I think that are terribly important that you have to try and achieve. It's very important to be brave. It's very important to be inventive. It's extremely important to be creative and to collaborate creatively with all the people in the rehearsal room. But that collaboration doesn't just happen between your fellow actors or you and the director as an actor. It also happens between you, the actor, and the play on the page, and possibly that is the most important collaboration that takes place, the one between you and the words on the page. What we're going to do over the next hour or so is have a conversation which looks at how we as a theatre company, how we as actors and directors can best lift the words off the page and bring them to life in a really exciting way, so that a play that is 400 years old or more, like As You Like It, really feels special and new and fresh, and that we as an audience in 2003 can make a connection with it. Although we're going to be looking particularly at As You Like It, all of the questions that we're going to be asking of the language on the page, you can transfer some of those questions and ask them of any piece of language in any Shakespeare play. All the time, I think, especially with Shakespeare, it's about inquiry and having your mind open to investigation, and sometimes investigating but not necessarily coming to any conclusion or finding any answers. What we'd really, really like is for you to join in with us and enjoy it and ask questions of your own later on. To begin with, I'd like to ask these guys how they got into doing Shakespeare, because we've already established he wrote his plays a long time ago. It's a very distant time, very distant from us now, and a lot of people find that quite a turn-off. They're not excited by that. So guys, Shakespeare, I'd like to ask you first of all, what was your first encounter with Shakespeare as a young person? Can you remember that far back? Tom?
My first encounter with Shakespeare was with an English teacher who took it upon himself to act out every single part. So
was he a good actor or a bad actor?
No, he's terrible, absolutely terrible actor. And we were all desperate to do one of the great big juicy speeches. And when we got to a really nice speech, say, right, I'll do this. And so you kind of just felt, I really want to do that.
So you were left feeling angry and frustrated, but still tempted.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Edmund.
I think my first real recollection is a film version of Romeo and Juliet, which the Franco Zeffirelli film, yes, which I think is probably made in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching it. I was pretty young, and just being so excited by the story, and really being aware that although the language was different and felt old-fashioned, but the story was incredibly clear, and that for me has always been something that I've wanted to hold on to. And actually the Baz Luhrmann movie, which probably many people are familiar with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, I think had that same sort of energy. I mean, obviously they updated the story, but I mean, I remember seeing that much more recently, obviously sort of 20 years later, and thinking, even that, that's something about that play maybe, but that really lends itself to clear storytelling.
So it was the energy of the story and the situation and the characters that really grabbed you.
Both films are terrific for that, and completely different because of course they've updated the more recent version is bang up to date, isn't it? So.
Branwell.
Well, I was very young. Again, it's Romeo and Juliet, but in a different guise. About 5 or 6 years of age, I saw West Side Story, and I thought it was the most fantastic film I'd ever seen. And my mother then bought it to me on video, and I watched it relentlessly every weekend for months and months on end. And it wasn't until many months after that she told me it was based on a Shakespeare play called Romeo and Juliet, and maybe I should read that. And at that very young age I did, and understood very little of it, didn't get very far into it, but gradually started to grasp hold of what it was he was saying, and saw the similarities between what I knew as West Side Story and what was Romeo and Juliet. And I think that's really my first experience of Shakespeare, followed closely by something similar to Tom's.
It's amazing how much of his work has actually been translated into other forms, into films, into musicals, and often our first encounter is not with the play itself, but with a variation on a theme. But that's a good way in. If it grabs your imagination and attention, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Naomi.
I remember my first encounter with Shakespeare vividly because it was sort of the first time I thought I want to be an actor as well. It was a production of, coincidentally, As You Like It, which the top grade at the senior school I was about to go to was performing, and it was just magic, this show. It was such a beautiful story. It was like a tiny little world on that stage, but it just shone out. I just remember it all in kind of yellows and greens. I don't remember much of the detail, actually, but it was an evening that really affected me and made me think, oh, I want to go on and do this if I can.
All of you actually, apart from Tom's description, you have positive experiences of your first encounter, and Tom's a very funny experience. I'm sure quite a lot of people also have quite negative experiences of Shakespeare, a first encounter with Shakespeare, or perhaps Shakespeare in school. Have you any negative experiences of Shakespeare that happened to you, but then you bypassed and moved on through?
Well, yes. I think a lot of the time in schools it's a heavy emphasis on dissection of the text. It's not approached from a practical point of view, and these plays were written to be performed by actors, to be spoken and delivered to an audience. And whenever that is taken totally out of the picture, and you have to go home and write essays and thesis on these words that sometimes don't make an awful lot of sense, that can be quite a daunting task. And that's why I think a lot of us can shy away from Shakespeare and other classical drama. And I've experienced what Tom did my first year of secondary school or high school, which was an abridged version of Macbeth. And I find it totally, not entertaining at all. And since then, it's one of my favourite plays. So I don't know.
I can remember reading around the class. We would each be allocated a part. And this was as early as maybe 13, 14. And I don't think any of us should underestimate how difficult the language of Shakespeare is. And at that age, none of us really made any sense of it. And you'd have an hour-long class of people reading through the lines, and very little of it making sense. And actors, professional actors, at a read-through, which is normally the very first thing you do in a rehearsal process, they don't make sense of it. It takes weeks and weeks sometimes for the sense of a line to become clear. It's a process of slow discovery. So sometimes the language can be off-putting, and you can think, actually, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. But you have to just work slowly away at it, and gradually, piece by piece, as you've probably found, it does become clear.
I think the word play is really important. When you think of the word play, you think of a child or children, you think of adventure, don't you? And all sorts of other non-threatening things. To play with the play in rehearsal and in a performance is incredibly important. And the playing in rehearsal, that just unearths all the meaning, all the possibility, all the great potential in the story. Where we work at the Royal Shakespeare Company back in England, we usually have about 7 weeks to put together a production from start to finish. So then we have the audience coming in and seeing the work. And anything can happen in that 7 weeks. It's a gathering of people and ideas, and who knows what's going to happen. But I'd like now just to talk to you about what actually did happen in your rehearsal room. Can you tell us, first of all, was it a glamorous rehearsal room? Were you sort of given sort of the best facilities? Can you paint the picture for everybody here about where you were working?
Well, it's not glamorous, as you might put it, but it's homely, and it's not like an army trench or anything like that. It's a church hall in Clapham in London, but it was very warm, it was very homely, it had a little kitchen, and we kind of developed like a little community there while we were rehearsing this play.
I think that's important what you've just said. You developed a community, but you came together, most of you not knowing each other.
Oh.
So how did you establish that community? Because it has to be established very quickly. Edmund?
I think my experience at actors are good at doing that, because we know that we go from one job to the next, and you form intense working relationships with people, sometimes for a short period of time, and then you move on. I mean, actually, working for the Royal Shakespeare Company is certainly the longest contract that I've ever done, and because we're working together pretty much for a year. But so I think very early on you get the sense that everyone knows you need to find a way of working together and communicating with each other as quickly as possible, which will then facilitate the work. And so I'm just aware that that's how there is a desire to get that up and running quickly. But I mean, often directors will use games and all sorts of exercises and game playing to get these people, otherwise normal grown-up adults, to get your inhibitions down and to get relax with each other so you can get the work going.
We had a director on As You Like It who was very keen to create the ensemble feeling straight. Do you know what I mean by ensemble? Just a kind of a group feeling, so that this wasn't just the lead character in the play is called Rosalind. Well, this wasn't just Rosalind's play, that everybody held this play and was important for this play. And so we bonded very quickly, because our director would make everybody read the part of Rosalind, or everybody read the part of Orlando, so that the responsibility wasn't just on a few people, it was everybody's job to bring this play to life. So that actually helped us as individuals, as actors, to become friends very quickly, because we were all working on this piece together.
In a nutshell, very short, sort of succinct thought, what would you say As You Like It is a play about? And you will all possibly have different thoughts, because you're different individuals with different imaginations and responses to things. So, Branwell, As You Like It is a play about?
Love.
Wonderful. Tom?
How love can transform.
How love can transform.
I would say the discovery of love.
I'm the last person, and they've all said what I wanted to say. But I think the transforming power of love is how I can most succinctly put it.
It is. It's a play about those things and much more as well, isn't it? Essentially, though, as you've just said, it's one about change that happens both sort of locationally, but also spiritually and emotionally. How did you embark on that journey through the change? How did the rehearsals begin?
Well, they began for me significantly later than they began for everybody else. I arrived to the company late, which was quite daunting, because a kind of a strong alliance had already formed between the rest of the company. I think we joined on the same day.
Yeah, Branwell and I joined on the same day, and actually the company already, maybe Naomi, without wanting to put you on the spot, but can tell us more about this, but there was some research that had been done beforehand, because I remember arriving and seeing all these drawings that people had done, some research into the world of the play, and that's often how a production starts off, isn't it?
Yes.
You start with a read-through, though, as well, don't you? And you described that a moment ago, where you have to go through the play line for line.
That's right.
Although did that happen in this production?
This was an unusual production, and we didn't do the read-through that I talked about earlier, but that is not normally the case. Normally you do have a read-through of the play just at the beginning. But this time we worked around the play, and we were asked through different games and exercises to try and feel the world of the play. And so the director told us very early on that in As You Like It, you have two distinct worlds. You have the world of the court, which is where the play begins, and then the characters all relocate for various reasons, and they are in the world of the forest. And so we had time thinking about the world of the court and finding words in the text that were formal words, words of ceremony, words of austerity, words of celebration, of that very rich world. And then we would do exercises finding out about the country and finding words that were about sheep and goats and brambles and weasels and all the things that colour that very different world, so that the place suddenly becomes something else, not at all what you started with. So early on in rehearsals, we did spend a lot of time just being very detailed and finding precise references that made sure that we were all imagining the same world, and that we weren't just having a vague picture about this play we were dealing with, that we were being very accurate in what we knew to be the world of the play.
It was incredibly detailed, the attention to the text.
We did draw
in
big
this play.
pictures in groups. We'd put sellotape together, big pieces of paper, and draw maps of the forest and of the court and all of this.
We also started to look at the setting of the play, because the play is set in the Victorian period in England, around about the 1840s.
So our production has chosen to set it there.
Yeah, so I went away and did a lot of research into that period, and then came back and we talked about that as a...
It's amazing, you know, you have that 7 weeks and it sounds like an incredibly long period of time, but actually you could go on and on and on, just unearthing all sorts of detail and information. And that's how it should be. Even though these guys are performing it now on a nightly basis at the Kennedy Centre and have been performing it back in England, their work doesn't stop. There's always something new to find, and I think that's the thrill of most plays, but especially of Shakespeare. There's always another layer to peel away. What we'd like to do now is I'm going to ask Tom and Edmund, if that's okay, if they take the floor and do a little bit more peeling back. The beginning of a play, any play, is really difficult, I think, and it's very important. It sets the tone. It's the moment that you tune in, you adjust your ears, you adjust your eyes, you absorb the first moment of a story. And like all the other moments in the play, there are choices that you can make, but the choices possibly that you make at the beginning do set the scene or set the tone for many other things that happen thereafter. So Tom, Edmund, take the scene and fill us in. Let us know who we're going to be watching and listening to and what's going on.
Okay. All right, so we're going to look at the first speech in the whole of the play. And Edmund's going to read in the part of Orlando. And I just want to set the scene just a little bit. There's a local landowner, Sir Rowland de Boys, who's recently died, and he has given all his money and his estate to his oldest son, Oliver. And Oliver is mistreating the actor that Edmund's going to play, Orlando. And so now in this first speech, we'll just listen to Orlando setting the scene of the play.
As I remember, Adam, it was upon this fashion bequeathed me by will but poor 1,000 crowns, and as thou sayest, charged my brother on his blessing to breed me well. And there begins my sadness. My brother Jakes he keeps at school, and report speaks goldenly of his profit. For my part, he keeps me rustically at home, or, to speak more properly, stays me here at home unkept. For call you that keeping, that differs not from the stalling of an ox? His horses are bred better, for besides that they are fair with their feeding, they are taught their manage, and to that end riders dearly hired. But I, his brother, gain nothing under him but growth, for the which the animals on his dunghills are as much bound to him as I. Besides this, nothing that he so plentifully gives me. The something nature gave me, his countenance seems to take from me. He lets me feed with his hinds, bars me the place of a brother, and as much as in him lies, minds my gentility with my education. This is it, Adam, that grieves me, and the spirit of my father, which I think is within me, begins to mutiny against this servitude. I will no longer endure it, though yet I know no wise remedy how to avoid it.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so now I'm going to look at this speech and I want to just involve you in directing it and changing it. Directing is all about choices, and I want to just throw this open to you. So the first thing that you can hear from that speech is that there's a huge amount of information in there. So the first thing that a director would probably say to an actor is just be careful of the pace, to slow it down. We call it exposition, that's the setting up of the story. So what I would say to Ed is just to watch the pace, be very, very careful of that.
Do you mean it's not to let it get too slow, or the other way around?
Just to not let it get too slow, but to make sure that you pick out the most important parts of the speech and make it very, very clear. Mm-hmm. What are the images within that speech that you particularly picked up on? Are there any particular phrases or images that you want to? Have you just got to get the mic?
When he mentioned something about how he was being treated as an ox is kept, and how his brother treats his or breeds his horses.
That's
better.
great.
Yeah. That was one of the things that sticks out.
That's great. So there's a lot of rustic, rural images, and that taps into one of the main themes in the play, which is the difference between the city and the country. Here, we're in the country. And what about the tone of the piece? What would you say is the tone? I mean, he refers to his sadness. Do you think that sadness is the overwhelming tone of this?
I don't know, I just got it more as complaining.
Right.
I guess just kind of whining about it and unhappy.
Okay, so what I would say to Ed is make sure that you keep that very focused, so that that it's not whiny so much as just frustration. That's the key thing. It's the mixture of sadness and frustration. There's a lot of antitheses in the play as well. So, Ed, you just want to explain a little bit about the antitheses that within the phrases?
I think what Tom means is there are oppositions set up in lots of the sentences. So, and that's sort of what gives its energy. You going from one image to the next. He does this to me, where he should actually treat me like this. So instead of you opposing the idea of he should treat me like a brother, but actually he treats me like the animals on his farm. And those are the sort of all through, well, this speech in particular, but also throughout the play is that sense of where of what one thing should be like and what it actually is like, and that when those two things rub up against each other, there's a real, well, I think you can find kind of energy in the speech from those oppositions that are set up.
Yeah. The image that we have in the Kennedy Centre is of Orlando over a saw, sawing away. And as he saws, he gets more and more frustrated and more pent up. So that's quite a clever device of focusing the audience's attention and creating an image, if you like, which feeds into the lines. And finally, are you aware of who Orlando is talking to? Could you tell from the first lines in the play? Is it just out into the open space, or is it actually talking to somebody? Did anybody pick up on that? Do you want to just grab that?
From what I could tell, he was talking to specifically somebody, someone named Adam, I believe.
That's right. That's great.
I mean, I couldn't really pick up who Adam was, but I know he was talking to him, and I guess in a matter of getting out the frustration towards him while he's obviously sawing. Put that image out to him, but he portrayed to the audience. So.
Great, fantastic, thank you.
Tom, can I try and do it again, and maybe using that idea of direct address to someone? Because when I last did it, I was doing it to all of you, so I'm going to choose someone to go to.
Let's get somebody. Can we just have someone up?
Well, I'll just pick someone out of the... I'll just talk to you. And you can be my Adam.
Okay.
Adam is in the old servant in the play, okay? Don't worry, he doesn't interfere.
Let's see the speech again.
As I remember, Adam, It was upon this fashion bequeathed me by will, but poor 1,000 crowns, and, as thou sayest, charged my brother on his blessing to breed me well. And there begins my sadness. My brother Jakes he keeps at school, and report speaks goldenly of his profit. For my part he stays me here at home, or to speak more properly, keeps me here at home unkept, for call you that keeping which differs not from the stalling of an ox. His horses are bred better, for besides that they are fair with their feeding, they are taught their manage, and to that end riders dearly hired. But I, his brother, gain nothing under him but growth, for the which the animals on his dunghills are as much bound to him as I. Besides this nothing that he so plentifully gives me, the something nature gave me, his countenance seems to take from me. He lets me feed with his hinds, bars me the place of a brother, and as much as in him lies, minds my gentility with my education. This is it, Adam, that grieves me. And the spirit of my father, which I think is within me, begins to mutiny against this servitude. I will no longer endure it, though yet I know no wise remedy how to avoid it.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, you can see there, just by scratching the surface a little bit and being prepared to look at choices and changes, how something suddenly becomes like a firework in front of you, can't you? And it's no longer just simply a case of being words on the page. It's alive and kicking and breathing through the personality of the actor. Here what we were looking at very much was beginning to get a sense of person, of characterization. But in Shakespeare, there are a great number of individuals who are almost characterless. They sometimes have names, but more often than not, they don't. They're called First Lord, Second Lord, or something other. But they have an important function. They move the story on. Now, the actor's job in this case is very, very different. And I'm going to invite Tom again and Branwell just to look at a particular moment from As You Like It that actually has to cope with a huge amount of information in a fairly anonymous fashion.
Okay. So we're now going to look a little bit further on in the play at Act 2, Scene 1. And this is in the forest of Arden. What's happened is that there are two brothers, Duke Senior and Duke Frederick. And Duke Frederick, the bad Duke as it were, has taken the court away from his brother, Duke Senior. And Duke Senior has retreated into the forest of Arden. And in this scene, Branwell, who's playing the First Lord, is relating that the Duke's men have come into an enclave in the forest. They've talked about their situation in the forest, and they're just about to leave. And they've been out hunting. And one of the lords, played by Bran, will now give this speech about a stag that they've seen.
Indeed, my lord, the melancholy Jaques grieves at that, and in that kind swears you do more usurp than doth your brother that hath banished you. Today, my lord of Amiens and myself did steal behind him as he lay along under an oak, whose antique root peeps out upon the brook that brawls along this wood. To the which place, a poor sequestered stag that from the hunter's e'en had ta'en a hurt, did come to languish. And indeed, my lord, the wretched creature heaved forth such groans that their discharge did stretch his leathern coat almost to bursting, and the big round tears coursed one another down his innocent nose in piteous chase. And thus, the hairy fool, much marked of the melancholy Jaques, stood on the extremest verge of the swift brook, augmenting it with tears. Poor dear, quoth Jaques, thou makest a testament as worldlings do, giving thy sum of more to that which had too much. Then, being there alone, left and abandoned of his velvet friend, 'tis right, quoth he. Thus misery doth part the flux of company.
Okay, that's great. Stop here. Thank you very much. All right, so throwing it out to you guys, what did you notice? What were the images or the words that particularly came through to you from that speech? Is there anything that you particularly heard in that?
When he was talking about to burst, that stuck out, and the tears flowing into the stream.
Great.
Yeah.
Did you know what that was in relation to?
Not really.
Okay, so when we do it again, we'll have to focus that section of the text. So there's a lot of very, very descriptive words in there, which are talking about a stag, a sequestered stag. That's a stag that's become separated from the herd. And there are these incredible descriptive words: wretched, groans, discharge, bursting. These are the words that I want you to pick out again when you do it. And right at the beginning of the speech, did anybody notice a big sort of mistake that the First Lord had done in relation to the Duke? Did anybody pick that out? Do you want to just do that little bit again?
Indeed, my lord, the melancholy Jaques grieves at that, and in that kind swears you do more usurp than doth your brother that hath banished you.
Does anybody notice something there? I mean, the key thing there is that Duke Senior, who's been banished, wouldn't want to be reminded of the fact by someone who is junior to him. So that would probably bring a bit of sort of an embarrassed
That does
pause.
come out within the playing of it, because obviously the Duke is on stage with the First Lord, and then he can endow that with an amount of embarrassment on my behalf that I've overstepped the mark and I've said something that maybe I shouldn't have done, but as a very open and benevolent man, he accepts it and it's laughed off, and then it's moved on into the story of the melancholy Jaques seeing this stag. So in that respect, that would come out in performance.
Yes.
But even in those few opening lines of that speech, there is a massive amount of information that kind of endows the forest, which we haven't yet seen, with, much energy and emotion, and how the people there live and the society that is there outside of the court.
Did anybody notice another character who was brought in, one particular name, who Branwell's character relates to? Do you notice the name of someone who he then goes on to quote later in the speech? He talks about the melancholy Jaques, who is one of the forest lords. And when you do it again, I'd like you to really bring out the quotation marks. So lift the parentheses, as it were, and make sure that it's very clear that Jaques is talking within it. Okay, so let's hear the speech again, taking into consideration those things.
Indeed, my lord, the melancholy Jaques grieves at that, and in that kind swears you do more usurp than doth your brother that hath banished you. Today, my lord of Amiens and myself did steal behind him as he lay along under an oak, whose antique root peeps out upon the brook that brawls along this wood, to the which place a poor sequestered stag, that from the hunter's aim had ta'en a hurt, did come to languish. And indeed, my lord, the wretched animal heaved forth such groans that their discharge did stretch his leathern coat almost to bursting, and the big round tears coursed one another down his innocent nose in piteous chase. And thus the hairy fool, much marked of the melancholy Jaques, stood on the extremest verge of the swift brook, augmenting it with tears. Poor dear, quoth Jaques, thou makest a testament as worldlings do, giving thy sum of more to that which had too much. Then, being there alone, left and abandoned of his velvet friend, 'tis right, quoth he. Thus misery doth part the flux of company. Anon, a careless herd, full of the pasture, jumps along by him, and never stays to greet him. Aye, quoth Jaques, sweep on, you fat and greasy citizens, 'tis just the fashion. Wherefore do you look upon that poor and broken bankrupt there? And thus, most invectively, he pierceth through the body of country, city, court, yea, and of this our life, swearing that we are mere usurpers, tyrants, and what's worse, to fright the animals and to kill them up in their assigned and native dwelling place.
Wonderful, that's
thanks very much.
fantastic. Can you just feel the pulse of that language? It's amazing, isn't it? It has such a lot of muscle in it. And also, it really allows the actor, you could see it there, to really sort of pull it in all sorts of different directions. I think you have to be incredibly fit to do Shakespeare, don't you? You can't do it sort of just standing still and no energy at all. Okay, so we've seen encounters with one actor and the language. But possibly the most thrilling and exciting thing about theatre is to play with your fellow actor. So now Naomi and Branwell are going to work together with Tom, and we're going to do a scene fairly early on in the play between the character of Celia that Naomi plays and the character of Rosalind, who is our heroine of the piece. And we're going to be a bit Shakespearean, and Branwell is going to play Rosalind, as he's so beautiful.
Wonderful.
And she would have had a beard then anyway. Tom.
Great, thanks very much. So we're going to go back now a little bit to Act 1, Scene 2. And this is the first time that we see Rosalind and Celia. Duke Senior, the banished Duke, his daughter Rosalind has been allowed to stay behind in the court by Duke Frederick, who's taken over, to be the companion of Celia. And here we see them relating for the first time.
I pray thee, Rosalind, sweet my coz, be merry.
Dear Celia, I show more mirth than I am mistress of, and would you yet were merrier. Unless you could teach me to forget a banished father, you must not learn me how to remember any extraordinary pleasure.
Herein I see thou lovest me not with the full weight that I love thee. If my uncle, thy banished father, had banished thy uncle, the Duke my father, so thou hadst been still with me, I could have taught my love to take thy father for mine. So wouldst thou, if the truth of thy love to me were so righteously tempered as mine is to thee.
Well, I will forget the condition of my estate to rejoice in yours.
You know my father hath no child but I, nor none is like to have, and truly when he dies, thou shalt be his heir. For what he hath taken away from thy father perforce, I will render thee again in affection, by mine honour I will. And when I break that oath, let me turn monster. Therefore, my sweet Rose, my dear Rose, be merry.
From henceforth I will, coz, and devise sports. Let me see. What think you of falling in love?
Great, thank you very much. So this establishes the two characters. It takes place in the garden, and it quickly establishes that they're both thinkers. They're both very intelligent women who are very witty and quite intellectual for their sort of years. Naomi, do you want to talk a little bit about how important this scene was in establishing the relationship between you and Rosalind?
The first scene when a character appears is always very important, of course, because the audience is introduced to somebody new and they need a little time to just get the flavour of that person. And the play, for Rosalind and Celia, the play begins with them together in the court of Celia's father, Duke Frederick. And this is Celia's home. This isn't Rosalind's home at all. But very quickly the play develops and it becomes a play really more about Rosalind's story than about Celia's. The actress who plays Rosalind is called Nina, and Nina and I, in rehearsals early on, encouraged by our director, we would do things like read in the church hall rehearsal room where we were. There was all sorts of junk lying around. There were Mills and Boon novels, so we used to read bits of Mills and Boon to each other. And then our director Greg would say, "Okay, now into the scene." And there we were. We'd been talking about somebody lying on a yacht, and then we'd be straight into the scene. Or we'd be, I don't know, I can remember sorting coat hangers. There was so much rubbish lying around this rehearsal room. Sorting coat hangers and talking to Rosalind and then plaiting bits of wool that was lying around and then into the scene. And very quickly we discovered that it wasn't a scene about, clearly they're friends, but it wasn't a scene about harmony and getting along. It was a scene where Celia was really annoyed with Rosalind and Rosalind was in a really bad mood, which is what happens between true friends. So this was something that became apparent quickly and that we had to work to make really true.
Great. So the scene could be played lots of different ways. Going back to what I was saying at the beginning, directing is all about choices. I mean, it could be the case that Celia's desperately trying to make Rosalind laugh. So maybe could we just see that of you desperately sort of trying to inspire,
Sure.
light and.
I pray thee, Rosalind, sweet my coz, be merry.
Dear Celia, I show more mirth than I am mistress of, and would you yet were merrier. Unless you could teach me to forget a banished father, you must not learn me to remember any extraordinary pleasure.
Herein I see thou lovest me not with the full weight that I love thee. If my uncle, thy banished father, had banished thy uncle, the Duke, my father, so thou hadst been still with me, I could have taught my love to take thy father for mine. So wouldst thou, if the truth of thy love to me was so righteously tempered as mine is to thee.
Well, I will forget the condition of my estate to rejoice in yours.
You know my father hath no child but I, nor none is like to have. And truly, when he dies, thou shalt be his heir. For what he hath taken away from thy father perforce, I will render thee again in affection. By mine honour I will. And when I break that oath, let me turn monster. Therefore, my sweet Rose, my dear Rose, be merry.
From henceforth I will, cause, and devise sports. Let me see. What think you of falling in love?
That's great. All right, so you see there's lots and lots of different ways that it can be played. And what we eventually ended up with in our production of As You Like It is really a sort of mixture of emotions. That's the best way of describing it. Of Celia on the one hand trying to cheer Rosalind, but also being very unsure as to why she is so down, and also being a little bit annoyed with her.
Why Celia, as Rosalind's best friend, can't bring her out of this bad mood. Because I think we all know about that. When your friend's in a really bad mood and you do your best to cheer them up and they carry on being in a bad mood, you think, well, I'm supposed to be your friend, aren't I good enough? So there's some of that going on.
That's great.
Should we have a go at doing it sort of more like that?
Let's do that for the final time.
Yeah?
Thanks.
Okay. I pray thee, Rosalind, sweet my coz, be merry.
Dear Celia, I show more mirth than I am mistress of, and would you yet were merrier. Unless you can teach me to forget a banished father, you must not learn me to remember any extraordinary pleasure.
Herein I see thou lovest me not with the full weight that I love thee. If my uncle, thy banished father, had banished thy uncle, the Duke, my father, so thou hadst been still with me, I could have taught my love to take thy father for mine. So wouldst thou, if the truth of thy love to me was so righteously tempered as mine is to thee.
Well, I will forget the condition of my estate to rejoice in yours.
You know my father hath no child but I, nor none is like to have, and truly, when he dies, thou shalt be his heir. For what he hath taken away from thy father perforce, I will render thee again in affection, by mine honour I will. And when I break that oath, let me turn monster. Therefore, my sweet Rose, my dear Rose, be merry.
From henceforth I will, coz, and devise sports. Let me see. What think you of falling in love?
That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you, Tom. As you can see there, theatre is very, very much a team sport. You can't do it on your own, can you? No. Not at all. And I imagine half of the pleasure, or a lot of the pleasure, is from that working it out together. Yes?
Because you don't do anything. You'll all know this because you perform, and you don't do anything by yourself. What you do depends on what the person did who just did it. It's all about
reaction.
feeding. That's
it's
it.
listening and then reacting to what you've just heard. So.
And the best acting is the best listening and the best watching. That's what brings the best acting, because it's the truest.
I'm sure you know Shakespeare's day, they didn't have the whole script. The actor only had his part, his part. And so they really had to listen very acutely to the other actor to come in at the right time and to respond. And it made for a very natural performance. Okay, we're going to ask some questions now, answer some of your questions, and we've got a phone number. The phone number to call is 1-800-672-0067, and we'd really, really, really like to hear from you. Okay, so any calls?
all the characters you guys have played, who's your favorite and why?
I guess that kind of gets difficult as you get older and you've played more parts, because every time you investigate a character, you find something to really latch on to and really focus on, and that you love about that person, who eventually kind of sort of infects the person that you are. But I don't know, whenever I was quite new to the business, I did a quite young production of Cyrano de Bergerac, and I played Cyrano, and I think that's the one I felt the most connection to since I've started performing. I don't know why. Maybe I felt that I was like him as a young teenager or whatever, and could never quite speak to the girls that I liked or whatever, which is totally his problem because of this huge nose that he has. He feels ugly, and it's just, again, it's beautiful text. It's a wonderful story, and he's a great hero, and I guess I would have to choose him.
Edmund?
You guys know what typecasting is, right? So I think lots of actors enjoy it when they feel that they're cast in a part that otherwise they wouldn't normally be seen for. And actually, watching Branwell giving his Rosalind just then reminded me when I was at university, we did an all-male production of Twelfth Night, and I got to play Olivia, obviously one of the female characters, and so. I'm not just doing something so different from yourself, because a lot of, especially not just in theatre, but even more so in television work and other work that actors do, you do find yourself being cast in a certain type as the years go on. So it's lovely to be able to do something completely different, and what could be more different than playing someone from the opposite sex.
Okay, well, we have a caller from California. Go ahead, caller.
Hello, I just wondered, how do you all manage to remember all those lines?
A very common question, very good question, thank you. How on earth do you remember all of those lines?
I think it takes us different amounts of time. Some people are really quick. Some people never have to learn their lines. They just rehearse for a couple of weeks, reading the text, and then suddenly they know them. I'm not like that. I have to work quite hard, and I find the best way is to borrow a friend and say, okay, you read in Rosalind, I'm going to do Celia, and be tested like that. It takes a while. In this particular rehearsal process of As You Like It, we used a special method called feeding, and so as actors rehearsing, we never held the text in our hand. We had somebody at the side of the stage who would hold the text for us and feed us line by line, just quietly at the edge of the rehearsal space, so that we never had to bother with, sometimes it can be very tricky to cope with trying to act and hold a book in your hand. So we never had that. We had somebody at the side of the stage feeding us line by line. And for some people that was a difficult way of getting hold of the lines, but I found it a useful way, sort of fed directly into me and into my thoughts and into my body. And it went in like that. There is no way of learning your lines. It just takes a little time, and for some people longer than others. And you should never underestimate how long it takes.
And now we have another caller, one from Colonial Heights in Virginia. So go ahead, caller.
All right, thank you very much. Your program is most interesting, and I wish I could see more of this kind of thing. Please tell me how each of the cast prepares for his role on a personal basis without the group when he's by himself. Thank you.
So let's take it sort of a night-by-night basis. What do you do in preparation for performance each evening? Branwell.
Well, this is, again, a very specific company. We all come together for 15 minutes every day. So it's not so much a personal thing. Then after that 15 minutes, some of us branch out. Some of us like to stretch, warm up physically, warm up vocally. Some of us like to go through all of our text. I personally just like to leave go of that so it's fresh whenever I go on stage. But I guess it's kind of warming up the body and the voice so that whenever you go out there, there's no risk of injury and there's no risk of damaging your voice. There's also singing calls because there's quite a lot of music in the show, and there's fight preparation for those that get involved in that. So night from night, it can differ really. It really depends what you need, if your body's tired or if you're feeling really energetic and you have to tone it down a bit. But pretty much just warm the body up and keep the voice in tune.
Edmund?
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo what Branwell said. It is a very personal thing. Everybody has a different system, but it is a very, on this show particularly actually, it's a very busy show to prepare for. There are lots of practical things that need to be achieved. The girls who wear wigs have to go in quite early to get fitted up for their wigs. We're obliged to do a fight rehearsal every night to make sure it's safe, and I'm in charge of that, and Branwell's involved in that as well. We go through all of the music in the show every single night to warm up the voices for that. So actually, when you just take those things out of it, that sometimes there's not an awful lot of time left. But yeah, I think I tend to like to spend some time on my own before the show, and other people enjoy the company of the others. But yeah, it's a very personal thing.
Now we have a question from the studio.
What kind of research do you do when learning a new role?
You did quite a lot of research, didn't you, Naomi, as part of the whole rehearsal process? Can you tell us about that?
Yes. You have to make the distinction between, when you're doing a classical piece, you have to make a distinction between the play as it was written and the production and when that is being set. Tom mentioned earlier the fact that we set this production in the Victorian period. Well, of course, the Victorian period was later on than when Shakespeare was writing the piece. So we had to do certain bits of Victorian research, and we looked at what was happening to the country at that time, which was that it was being divided up into what was known as enclosures, so that there was a very, very big distinction between the rich people and the poor people, which makes sense in As You Like It, because you do have the people who belong to the court who have a lot of wealth, and then you have the poor shepherds who don't even own the land that they look after the sheep on. So we looked at that to imagine how people lived then and to imagine the extremes of wealth. And then things like costumes really help you as well, and so you get help in your research from the designers on the show who are doing their own research into the whole aesthetic. So I was very glad when I could see my costumes. I wear beautiful dresses in the show, a very rich one. It's sort of like the shape of Scarlett O'Hara's one in Gone with the Wind, with a tiny little bodice and then a huge skirt, and that really helps in the court at the beginning to sort of swan about feeling very like a princess. And then into a sort of shepherdess costume when I go into the forest. All those things really feed an actor, because it's those most immediate things, those most tangible things that give you the reality of your character. But yes, just it's the thinking. And when we were talking about preparing for a show, it's the thinking of the part, the thing that helps me most. Never mind, how long it's taken to put my wig on, or the warm-up I've done with everybody else for 15 minutes, vocally and physically. It's just thinking that character. That's sort of more valuable than any research. Just finding that place where their mind rests. What thoughts are they thinking just at that point before the scene is going to begin? So we saw the scene where Celia first enters, and so my thoughts, just as I'm standing in the wings before I go on, are always, oh, what's wrong with Rosalind now? Oh, she's always in a bad mood. And also I have to think in the play about the fact that my father has been behaving very unfairly. So as long as I can kind of engage there, I'm normally all right.
Okay, fantastic answer, thank you. But now we have a caller from Martinsville, Virginia. So go ahead, caller, please.
Yes, I would like to know, how long did it fully take you to understand the play? Because the way Shakespeare writes, it isn't like we talk today. I just want to know how long it took to learn.
Trying to understand the whole play for meaning is one of the biggest challenges, really, of the rehearsal period, isn't it? And you do that in all sorts of different ways. Tom?
I think you keep understanding it as the production goes on as well. It's not just limited to the rehearsal room. But we were very lucky, and we are very lucky at the RSC, because we have 8 weeks, which means that we can, as we've spoken about, really take the play apart, look at the language, and we have a specific voice team at the Royal Shakespeare Company who can help us with that. So it's sort of an evolving process, really, which you still find new things out. The actors still find lots and lots of new things out months and months into a run. There isn't sort of any sort of finite point, really. I think that's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a play that's got a lot of very dense text in it, and it makes a lot of references to things that just don't happen today. And particularly the comedy is quite hard to get into, and sometimes I find myself standing on stage, even just last night, and it suddenly occurred to me that that's what that means. I finally get it. But there are still other parts in the play where I'm listening and I'm listening intently, but perhaps I'm not quite tuned in to what the other actor is trying to get across, and then it will come to me later on. It's constantly going up the hill. It's like climbing a mountain, you know, keep going.
We used to do an exercise in our rehearsal process of repeating a line, and if anybody in the room didn't understand that line, they would they'd have to say, I don't understand. And sometimes we do a line 20 times and still not understand.
I think it's really important not to go into any of these rehearsals thinking, I have to know it all.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to. In fact, knowing nothing and being prepared to learn is possibly a much better thing than knowing it all and being sort of sticking firm to that. Guess what? We've run out of time. We've got no time left. So I'd just like to say a few thank yous. I'd really like to thank the students in the studio from Woodbridge Senior High School's Performing Arts programme for being with us. They've been tremendous. And I'd also like to thank you, the viewing audience from across the country, for tuning in to the programme and for calling in and asking us some questions. Now, if you didn't get a chance to ask any questions today, you can contact the performers by using the email address on the screen, and we'd really love to hear from you and answer any of the questions you might have. Also, we'd like to invite you to visit the Kennedy Centre website at the address on the screen, and there you'll find even more information about this programme and the Kennedy Centre's upcoming programmes, as well as other resources on integrating the arts into the curriculum, which is incredibly important. We'd like to hear what you think of the Kennedy Centre Performing Arts series, so if you could complete an electronic evaluation form at the address on your screen, this will help us to select the topics and resources that you really, really need to enhance your classroom experience. Please remember, our next Kennedy Centre programme will be on Thursday, May 15 from 11 to 12 noon, that's Eastern Time, when the artist Jamie Wyeth will demonstrate how works of art can help us better understand significant people and events in our history. So that's going to be a really good programme. And finally, thank you again for being with us. Thank you. So, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you for being our audience. Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Keep going. Keep going. We've got to keep talking.
I would just like to bring it back to research, because